Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, I will introduce another sustainable tourism case study, sustainable tourism in Antarctica. Antarctica is the last and largest unspoiled wilderness area on Earth. There is much discussion over whether sustainable tourism in Antarctica can ever be possible. Given the long-haul flights involved in getting there and the potential to spoil such a pristine environment. In this video we look into 4 areas regarding sustainable tourism in Antarctica. 1. Introduction of Antarctica. 2. Human impacts on Antarctica. 3. Antarctica tourism. 4. Sustainable management of Antarctica tourism. Before we get into the details, please have a look at these questions, and we can answer them while watching the video. 1. Where is Antarctica? 2. How has tourism grown in Antarctica? 3. What factors have influenced the development of tourism in Antarctica? 4. What are the impacts of tourism activities on Antarctica? 5. In what way Antarctica tourism can be managed and environmental impacts be minimized? First of all, some basic knowledge about this continent. Antarctica is the world's southernmost continent, the site of the South Pole. It is the 5th largest continent, almost entirely covered by an ice sheet, enclosed by the Antarctic Circle. It is divided into regions depending on which country is closest to any given location. Some quick facts about Antarctica. It is the world's highest, driest, windiest, coldest, and iciest continent. Its area is 13 million square kilometer. 1.4x bigger than the USA. It has the Transantarctic mountain chain, length is 3,300 kilometers. The highest 3 mountains are Mount Vinson, Mount Tyree and Mount Shin. It has 70% of all the world's freshwater frozen as ice and 90% of all the world's ice. The nearest other landmasses are South America 1,000 kilometers away across the Drake Passage. Australia is 2,500 kilometers away. South Africa 4,000 kilometers away. The continent's main landforms are glacier, desert, mountain, plain, plateau, valley, and nunatak. The lowest ever temperatures recorded on Earth have been recorded here, at Vostok, Antarctica, where it dropped to nearly -89.2 degrees Celsius. For many months during the year, there is 24 hours of darkness or 24 hours of light as the Earth orbits the Sun. You can also witness the aurora australis or southern lights here. The environment is also incredibly sensitive. It can take many hundreds of years for rubbish to decompose because of the extremely low temperatures. And the food chain is delicate because most of the marine life relies upon krill as their primary source of food. There are no permanent residents and never has been a native population in Antarctica. There are about 5,000 inhabitants on a scientific base in Antarctica. But there are over 50,000 summer tourists. In the 1993-1994 season, the tourists visiting Antarctica outnumbered the scientists for the first time. Often dubbed the final hint of civilization on the southernmost end of the world, McMurdo Station is a U.S.-run scientific research station in Antarctica. The largest encampment of its kind is also the least accessible place on the White Continent. home to about 1,200 summer residents and 250 hardy folks who brave the winter harshness every year. McMurdo is a true small city by all intents and purposes. It boasts a chapel, several ATMs, a golf course, 3 plane landing strips, a fire station, a post office, and 2 bars. Windiest continent on Earth, Antarctica is very much alive, is home to some of the most breathtaking scenery and unique wildlife you'll even see. 6 species of seals and 12 species of birds live in Antarctica. There are about 350 species of vegetation, mostly lichens, mosses, and algae. The most famous inhabitant of Antarctica is the penguin. More than anything else, krills are the engine that powers the Antarctic ecosystem. They are a small semi-transparent crustacean like a shrimp. About 4 to 5 centimeters in length when fully grown, they can live for up to 6 years, which is quite remarkable considering the wide variety of animals that fed on them in huge quantities. Southern elephant seals are the largest species of seal on the planet and a highlight among Antarctica cruise wildlife. Emperor penguins are one of the classic penguin species that people imagine when they hear the name. Along with king penguins and Adelie penguins, they are representative of the whole group. The vegetation in Antarctica is predominantly made up of lower plant groups, mosses, liverworts, lichens and fungi that are specially adapted to surviving in extreme environments. The greatest diversity of species is found along the western side of the Antarctic Peninsula, where the climate is generally warmer and wetter than elsewhere in the Antarctic continent. In the recent 200 years, human impacted the continent extensively. In 1985, a unique skull was discovered lying on Yamana Beach in Antarctica's South Shetland Islands. It belonged to an indigenous woman from southern Chile in her early 20s, thought to have died between 1819 and 1825. It was the oldest known human remains ever found in Antarctica. The earliest record of anyone setting foot on Antarctica was in 1821. The first year-round occupation, overwintering, was in 1898. The South Pole was first reached in 1911 by Roald Amundsen. International Geographic Year, South Pole Station was built in 1957-58. The scientific efforts led to the establishment of the Antarctic Treaty, which has been signed by 44 countries, passed into law in 1961. Many attempts of people around the world trying to land on Antarctica. Who owns Antarctica? 7 sovereign states have made territorial claims in Antarctica, which are Argentina, Australia, Chile, France, New Zealand, Norway, and the United Kingdom. In 1959, Antarctic Treaty was signed by 12 countries. Original signatories were nations active in Antarctica during the International Geophysical Year of 1957–58. It sets aside Antarctica as a scientific preserve, established freedom of scientific investigation, and banned military activity on that continent. Article 7 of the Madrid Protocol unambiguously prohibits mining in Antarctica. It states that any activity relating to mineral resources, other than scientific research, shall be prohibited. 1. Prioritization of protection of Antarctica as a wilderness for aesthetic and scientific value. 2. No mining. 3. All activities require environmental impact assessments, including tourism. 4. All member nations should be prepared for emergency responses across the area. 5. Wildlife cannot be taken or harmfully interfered with without a permit. 6. Waste management plans are required, including the removal of waste from the continent. 7. Waste from past activities to be removed. 8. Some harmful materials banned completely. 9. Discharge of waste from ships regulated. 10. Some areas designated as specially protected places that limit any human contact or interference and to preserve historical sites. Other environmental factors, Antarctica's fragile ecosystem is being threatened. Some species of Antarctic animals have been taken to the verge of extinction for economic benefit. Others have been killed incidentally or disturbed. Soils have been contaminated. Untreated sewage has been discharged into the sea, and rubbish that will not decompose or break down for hundreds of years has been left behind in even the remotest parts. The main threats in Antarctica are: 1. Climate change, global warming. 2. Fishing, both legal and illegal. 3. Invasive species. 4. Tourism. 5. Pollution. 6. Exploration and exploitation of mineral reserves, oil, and gas. 7. Direct impacts associated with the development of infrastructure for scientific bases and programs. Impact of fisheries. Fishing is currently the only large-scale resource exploitation that is going on in Antarctica. Most other world fisheries have been overexploited even where controls are in place to prevent it. This is a concern for Antarctic fisheries too. Species of toothfish are subject to illegal fishing by unregistered and unregulated vessels due to the premium prices paid by upmarket restaurants. Overfishing of particular target species such as Antarctic krill whales. Krill populations have declined by 80% since the 1970s. The Antarctic whale fishery has been described as being more like mining rather than a sustainable fishery. Once the most profitable species had been hunted to a point of great scarcity. Effects on other species that depend on the target species as a food resource or eaten by the target species. Killing of other fish, vertebrate or invertebrate species accidentally caught alongside the target species, that bycatch. Destruction of habitat by fishing gear. Antarctica is particularly sensitive to the effects of pollution as the environment is near pristine to begin with, meaning that any pollution is often more obvious. The cold temperatures mean that the natural processes that help remove pollution in other parts of the world happen far more slowly. Antarctica is, however, the most stringently protected part of the Earth. There are strict guidelines under the Antarctic Treaty Protocol on environmental protection about what can and can't be left in Antarctica. Unfortunately though, despite being so far from the rest of the world and not connected by any landmass, pollution from elsewhere does also find its way to Antarctica. There are no current plans to mine Antarctica, and mining is currently completely banned by the Antarctic Treaty until 2048. There are no known future plans by any of the Antarctic Treaty nations to reverse this decision. As noted in the graph, human activities in the sub-Antarctic islands have contributed to approximately 200 non-native species. Both intentional, rabbits and reindeer for food, and unintentional, mice, rats, worms, and grasses. They have come to survive in, and sometimes to dominate, their habitats, often causing alterations to the ecosystems. The stratospheric ozone layer protects life on Earth by absorbing ultraviolet light, which damages DNA in plants and animals, including humans, and leads to sunburns and skin cancer. Prior to 1979, scientists had not observed atmospheric ozone concentrations below 220 Dobson units. But in the early 1980s, through a combination of ground-based and satellite measurements, scientists began to realize that Earth's natural sunscreen was thinning dramatically over the South Pole each spring. This thinning of the ozone layer over Antarctica came to be known as the ozone hole. The Antarctic Peninsula is particularly sensitive to small rises in the annual average temperature. This has increased by nearly 3 degrees Celsius in the region in the last 50 years. 10 times faster than the average in the rest of the world. Rising temperatures cause ice shelves to break up. Changes in the marine environment becoming evident, such as species distribution and abundance, which result in community and food web shifts. Antarctica is already losing more than 200 billion tons of ice each year. Most of that comes from glaciers at the edge. The Antarctic Treaty recognizes tourism as a legitimate activity. But tourist numbers have grown exponentially. 1958 until 1987, an average of fewer than 1,000 tourists visited Antarctica each season. Beginning in the 1980s, the number of tourists who visited the continent annually began to rise sharply. Within the space of 20 years, the numbers had increased by more than 600%. Despite a global recession and downturn in visitor numbers over the last 2 austral seasons, the expectation is that Antarctic tourist numbers will trend upward again as the world tourism market recovers and the demand for Antarctic visits increases. According to IAATO, from 2019-2020, the total number of tourists visiting Antarctica was 55,164. Among them, 18,506 are cruise-only visitors to the Antarctica Peninsula region, which can be reached from South American ports in a few days. 731 are deep-field visitors. Over 100 companies around the world are involved in Antarctica tourism. Visitors are mainly from rich nations, 34% American, 11% Australian, 8% British, and tend to fly to New Zealand, Chile or Argentina and set sail from there. China has the most rapid increase in tourists' arrivals. In 2018-2019, 15% of tourists are from China. Antarctica tourism has four basic forms: expedition cruises, land-based activities, cruise only, no landing, and air and cruise combination with landing. The majority of the visit is expedition cruises with landings. This is followed by cruise only, no landing. Airborne tourism began in 1977. Regular sightseeing passenger flights began in 1977 and developed using passenger aircraft flying from Australia. Most tourists visit Antarctica between November and March when the sea ice has melted and there are long hours of daylight. Shipborne tourism started from the 1950s. Most ships depart from South America, Ushuaia in Argentina, Hobart in Australia, and Christchurch or Auckland, New Zealand. Most of the activities in Antarctica are small boat landings, followed by small boat cruising. Yachts and Category 1 ships generally land on the continent with a duration lasting approximately 1 to 3 hours. There can be between 1 to 3 landings per day using inflatable crafts or helicopters to transfer visitors. Category 2 ships typically sail the waters with or without landing. Cruise ships carrying more than 500 passengers are no longer operational as of 2009 due to concerns of oil or fuel spills. The principal destination is the Antarctic Peninsula region, which includes the Falkland Islands and South Georgia. Certain private expeditions may include visits to inland sites, such as Mt. Vinson or the geographic South Pole. An expedition can last from a few days to several weeks. Most of the activities while on land include visits to operational scientific stations and wildlife sites, hiking, kayaking, camping, etc. Excursions are always accompanied by seasoned staff members, such as an ornithologist, marine biologist, geologist, naturalist. There are 85 historic sites and monuments approved by the ATCM, the Antarctic Treaty Consultative M. This is a countdown of the 11 most popular activities that tourists could do in Antarctica. 1. Kayaking. 2. Polar plunge. 3. Camping. 4. Zodiac tours. 5. Mail a letter at Port Lockroy. 6. Visiting penguins. 7. Deception Island. 8. Cruising the Lemaire Channel. 9. Photograph icebergs. 10. Whale watching. 11. Cross the Drake Passage. A trip to Antarctica can range anywhere from as little as $3,000 to $4,000 to over $40,000, depending on the scope of transportation, housing, and activity needs. The higher-end packages typically involve air transport, on-site camping, and a visit to the South Pole. Because of the Antarctic Treaty, only certain carriers can visit and they're required to have a permit. This means that even though there are now quite a few companies offering these cruises, there is still a limited supply. Going to Antarctica is expensive for companies when you think about the costs they endure. The flight, military-grade cruise ship, the equipment, the Zodiac boats, the permits, the food, and everything else it takes to safely get to the seventh continent are all very high-ticket items. This table is a breakdown of our costs to visit Antarctica. 11 days cruise visit to Antarctica will cost about $11,193 per person. The increase in visitors, confined to certain areas and via highly polluted transport, raises questions about the sustainability and environmental impact of so many people visiting such a fragile environment. What sustainability issues might arise from Antarctica tourism? Tourism in Antarctica causes both positive and negative impacts. Pollution from exhaust fumes and the oil and liquid gas that is emitted from the boats, cruisers traveling in Antarctica. Researchers are concerned that if a cruise ship were to strike an iceberg, it could contaminate the water and wildlife with a major oil spill. This could affect and kill rare or endangered species. Whilst there haven't been any major pollution incidents of losses of life as a result of tourism in Antarctica, there was a very close call in November 2007 when the MV Explorer boat sank. A surface oil slick 1.5 kilometers long and covering 2.5 square kilometers resulted from the sinking, with further slicks in the days after the sinking. There are concerns that tourists may transmit invasive species such as microbes that do not belong in Antarctica, by either purposefully or accidentally bringing plants or microorganisms with them that could disturb the natural environment and potentially spread disease. There are fears that tourists' proximity to penguins and seals could disturb their breeding patterns and that they may abandon eggs and young as a result. Though regulated under Antarctica Treaty, the biodiversity of the continent is under increasing threat from human activities including tourism. Within the Antarctic Treaty area, the Antarctic Peninsula region, April, is predicted to be at the greatest risk. This is because it is a. the closest to another continent, South America, b. the least climatically extreme region, with the highest summer temperatures and the longest growing season, c. the largest focus of human activity, both governmental and tourism, and d. the region which has experienced the largest rise in temperatures since the 1950s, this being predicted to continue. Showing the location of major research stations and infrastructure and tourist visitor sites. Currently, all 14 of the known non-native species within the Antarctic Treaty area are found within the April, which demonstrates the vulnerability of the region. Human disturbance of penguin nesting colonies cause birds to abandon nests, eggs lost through crushing or predation by skuas. Two famous accidents in Antarctica are the Mount Erebus air crash in 1979, and the sinking of the MV Explorer in 2007. Both accidents caused oil spills and pollution. There are many other ways tourists can affect Antarctica negatively. Trekking companies operate tourist camps and onshore resource centers which have greater impacts than ship-based visits. Icebreakers and helicopters will leave their carbon footprint. Historic-era huts, many of which have been restored and turned into small museums, but are developing visitor management problems. Animal and plant diseases may be spread by tourists. The locations where tourism is focused are fragile terrestrial environments which are also the main breeding sites for wildlife and cause disturbance to the wildlife. There is some positive impact of tourism in Antarctica. Tourists' awareness of the fragility of this environment could be increased. As a result, they could become ambassadors for the environment, helping to protect it. The awareness of the unique environment is increased as people are able to visit it. How can these sustainability issues best be managed? The management of Antarctica tourism is complex because it needs a high level of international cooperation between Antarctic Treaty members and the travel industry. Commercial travel in Antarctica began in the mid-1960s. Consequently, tourism is not mentioned in the Antarctic Treaty. Tourism regulation developed organically, but slowly, alongside tourism activities. Operationally, the treaty parties left the management of Antarctic tourism activities largely in the hands of the tour operators and the International Association of Antarctica Tour Operators, IAATO, which was founded in 1991 by 7 companies. The vision of IAATO is, through self-regulation, Antarctic tourism is a sustainable, safe activity that causes no more than a minor or transitory impact on the environment and creates a core of ambassadors for the continued protection of Antarctica. Today the large majority of all tour operators operating in Antarctica are members of IAATO, including all commercial solace passenger ship operators. The association's membership comprises 105 companies and organizations from all over the world. IAATO membership categories also include provisional operators and associate members who are in the process of demonstrating membership requirements to become operators and those who wish to support IAATO's mission and vision. International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators is an organization that rules the companies running holidays to Antarctica and tries to be environmentally friendly. Restrictions on tourism include banning the use and carriage of heavy and intermediate fuel oils for all shipping in the Antarctic Treaty area, as these larger ships pose the biggest potential threat to Antarctica from fuel leaks, as they carry so much and from potential sinking. No more than 100 passengers ashore at one time. No boat carrying over 500 passengers can land in Antarctica. The tourist industry has to follow the rules of the Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1961, where countries agreed to establish the Antarctic as a zone free of nuclear testing, free from the disposal of radioactive waste, and so on. Visitors are not allowed to visit sites of special scientific interest which often contain the most vulnerable wildlife, e.g. penguin breeding grounds. Permits are required to travel in Antarctica. The U.S. has its own permit system which applies to all U.S. citizens and makes it unlawful to take native animals or birds from the continent, to enter specially designated areas, to introduce species to the continent, or discharge pollutants. Tourism is and should continue to be a driving force in conservation. IAATO members highlight education as a component of visiting Antarctica, enabling visitors to learn about this unique environment and its value to global science. Visitors traveling with IAATO members, representing more than 100 different nationalities on average per season, return home as ambassadors for the continent's continued conservation. Many governmental bodies and NGOs at different scales involved in the management of Antarctica, such as the British Antarctic Survey, UK Antarctic Heritage Trust, United Nations Environment Programme, Australian Antarctic Division, Antarctica New Zealand International Antarctica Centre and New Zealand Antarctic Institute. The final question for today. Look at the message in the slides, and what measures you think can be taken to reduce the environmental impacts on Antarctica. This can be considered from the 5 areas: wildlife, vegetation, alien species introductions, littler and historical buildings. That's all for this session. In this video we looked at these 4 topics. Introducing Antarctica. Human impact on Antarctica. Tourism in Antarctica. And sustainable tourism management in Antarctica. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy it. Don't forget to click like and subscribe to the channel for more to come. See you next time.